Okay, today I have the pleasure of being able to talk to someone that was introduced to me by Andrew Benson, who we interviewed just a few weeks ago. His name is Johnny Woods, and he has many different hats that he wears. One of them is that he's part of the label running system of Undervolt and Company, which was the video label that Andrew works with, and it also obviously carries Johnny's work as well, and some amazing animation work it is. He does a very peculiar and very stylistically strong kind of animation work for himself, but he also has got a lot of other stuff going. So rather than me trying to enumerate everything, let's first of all say hi to Johnny. Hi, Johnny. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm all right. Thanks a lot for taking time out of your schedule to talk to me.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, why don't we start off by having you identify yourself? Rather than me trying to read your bio, why don't you tell me how you think of yourself?
Well, I do a lot of different stuff. I'm restless. I've always been restless. And I've had a lot of really cool opportunities to do a lot of different stuff, but it hasn't been a straight line for me. So, I mean, I guess going from now and working backwards, I'm current. I've had my first full-time job that I've had in 36 years on this earth now, and I make, it's nothing that I would ever do as an artist, but I work for BuzzFeed, and I find it just fascinating. But going back from there, only about 4 years ago, I started doing animation, and that came out of a few years, for the 5 or 6 years before that, I was doing video art and doing music videos and freelance video work. And I just finally hit this point where it's frustrating to make videos when you have kind of a more unusual vision for things. You need to rally up a lot of people. So, and you need to rally up a lot of resources to make a video.
Sure.
So when I realized that you could do this thing just by sitting at a desk by yourself in your underwear and make an entire film, that was kind of a big moment for me. So it coincided actually right when I moved to Los Angeles from New York. I sort of dove into doing animation pretty much full time. But never really, I've always had a complicated relationship with like calling myself an artist. I mean, I guess I call myself whatever fits the context that I'm working in at the time. So
right.
If I am asked to do something for a gallery or to do a performance or something along those lines, I'll call myself an artist. But if I'm asked to show something in a film festival or a screening, I'll call myself a filmmaker or a director or whatever. But for me, it's always just been, I just really like making stuff more than anything else, and
right.
Any opportunity I have to make something, I will jump on it. And it's difficult to build a definable career that way, but
right.
But it's been great fun and a great adventure. So yeah, that's I'm clearly very bad at defining myself, so that's what you get.
It's interesting though, because you have a really varied set of things you do, so it would make sense that defining yourself's a little troubling. Also, it seems to me like the work of doing animation is actually a hard to define role, because unlike almost any other discipline, you really have to sort of manage 20 jobs at once. You really are a director and a scriptwriter and a director of photography, and you're all of these things because it sort of sits on your lap.
Yeah. And I think that's also the like a constant topic amongst me and other people I know who work the way that I do, is like what we're doing is unheard of in any kind of commercial world or in the industry at large. Like, if you tell people you're an animator, the first thing they ask you is, "Oh, what studio do you work for?" And when you say like, oh, I just make them myself, people look at you like you're crazy, especially out here in LA. Or they assume you're just like a grad student, finishing your thesis film or whatever. But so it's kind of this weird little world of people doing this stuff, because it is not common. And I don't think it's because we're like some kind of superheroes who can manage these, 20 different tasks at once. I think it's just because we have really stubborn visions and we don't mind sacrificing some parts of the technical process in order to have that kind of control over creating something.
Yeah, well, that's actually what I was going to ask was what extent, I mean, you use the word stubborn, which is probably actually the best word to use, but,
yeah.
It does seem like most of the people I know that do this kind of work, and I don't know that many, but everyone that I know are like, kind of control freaks. I hate to like lay that label on your head, but it just seems like there's something that says, I can do it, and therefore I don't have to depend on other people. So therefore, that's where I'm staking my claim.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, my problem has always been that I'm too nice. So I wish I was more of a control freak, but my biggest problem when I was trying to make live action videos was I never felt comfortable like asking people to work for free or asking people to work really long hours or like pulling in favors from people. Yeah. And to me, that was always the big stumbling block. And with animation, it was like, oh, cool, I don't have to ask anybody to do anything. I can make like the personal sacrifices to do this myself. Actually, there's like a lot of technical things I wish I could bring people in to do better for me. Right. And when I have the budgets for projects, that's always the first thing I do. I'm like, oh, cool, I can handle I can hire like Andrew, who I have recently hired to work on a big project that I had because he's better at certain things than I am. So, but I think where the control thing comes in is that if I was making things with a team of people instead of just by myself, then money has to be involved somehow, and that money has to come from somewhere. Right. And that's the control part of that for me. I was trying to avoid was if someone else is paying for this, then I'm not going to get to do what I want to do with it. So I have to find a way to make it happen all by myself.
That's an interesting point, and one that I think a lot of people don't think about, regardless of what the context, whether you're being commissioned for a work by a gallery or you're being commissioned for work by a advertising group or a band that wants to do a video or whatever art you're doing. When someone else is footing the bill, they're the people that get to set the expectations, and they're to get people who get to pull the trigger and say something's done. And I don't know about you, but for me, one of the most frustrating things in the world is when somebody else tells me that a thing is done and I don't yet feel like it's done. Yep.
Absolutely. And I mean, the thing for me has always been that, when you make work as an artist, you're trying to communicate something successfully. Mm-hmm. And when you create something that you feel is communicating successfully and someone else tells you it's not, and you need to change it, or someone else stops you before you get to that point, that to me was always really frustrating. Like, you're just like, but it's missing the point, and they're like, oh, but it's fine, and you're just sad. So, but there's good, there's I've had as many good experiences as I've had bad, in terms of working with commission projects. So they're not all, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It can actually be a really great thing if you're working with the right people who want what you're doing for the right reasons.
Right.
And I think that's actually more rare. And I think a part of it is just that we don't meet people in person. this might be going off onto a slightly different topic, but all the good commissions that I've gotten have been from people who eventually I became friends with, or people who I was friends with before. And I think this goes for collaborators as well, is that it's kind of like, it's really easy to misinterpret what somebody is saying if you've only been exposed to their work online.
Right.
And I always find that when I meet artists whose work I like in person for the first time, sometimes I meet people and I'm like, oh my God, you're exactly like your work. That's amazing. And sometimes you meet people and you're like, oh, but it always gives you this window into what their work is really about that I don't think you necessarily get by just kind of surface browsing.
Sure.
And I think that's a big problem when it comes to commissioned work. People will see something that like I do online and they don't understand what it's actually about.
Right.
And they are then asking for something based on their misunderstanding of what it is. And when I give them what I'm capable of doing, they're like, oh, but that's not what I wanted.
Oh, man. Yeah. It seems like the virtual life is so rife with misinterpretation of all sorts. Mm-hmm. And that's a really good pointed example. So I am always curious when I meet particularly artists that do stuff that's unfathomable to me. And believe me, I look at your work and it's really hard for me to imagine a person doing it, which is that's exciting for me.
Yeah.
It's exciting because then there's like a lot of magic tied into it, right? But I'm curious about what your background is and how you got where you are today, because it's, given the quality and type of your work, I'm expecting that there's an interesting story there.
It's not as interesting as you would. Well, okay, there is actually there's one interesting part of this, and I've actually never said this publicly out loud before, so I'll give you this fun tidbit. But I went to school for art, but not in any technical way. I always liked computers. I was always good at computers. And actually, when I was younger, I was much more involved in music than I was in art. But going to school for art seemed like a great way to also be able to make music, which I think is a pretty common thing.
Right.
But I got out of grad school, and I was doing video work, but nothing close to what I was doing now. I was doing basically like what you would consider BJ stuff, but I was doing it in the context of an art context, or trying to. I wasn't doing it very successfully, but I was doing a lot of things with video feedback and with compositing, and that led me into working a lot with After Effects and different things. And right before I graduated from school, I got a call from a college in the area that was looking for someone to teach like visual effects compositing.
Okay.
And I guess they were like really desperately searching. So they interviewed me. They asked me a whole bunch of questions. I knew the answers to this. I was able to explain the answers well enough to where they offered me the job to teach like high-end visual effects software that I had never even heard of, let alone know how to use. But of course, I took the job, and then I just crammed, and then it was almost like my second education. Sure. I taught at the school for about almost 4 years, and from teaching compositing classes, I moved to teaching some 3D classes, and that's where I learned Maya, just because they didn't have anyone else to teach it. So I was like, well, better learn Maya now.
Right.
But the interesting thing was that it wasn't until I quit that job that I actually started using those tools creatively.
Yeah.
It was like, because that whole process, every week I was kind of like cramming so that I could learn enough to teach my students
Right.
And I was doing it in very specific examples. It was like mostly visual effects leaning. But I learned so much in such a short time, because the great thing about teaching is that you get to learn from all of your students' mistakes as well as your own. So if you have like 60 students in a semester, you are getting 60 times the mistakes. And I think that was like a huge benefit, having that kind of experience. And I still talk to quite a few of my students, and I hope none of them hear this, because they'll be like, I knew it, or whatever. But it was, I was teaching for a long time, and then I decided that I didn't want to teach anymore because I wanted to do some stuff. And that's when I moved to Los Angeles. And right when that happened, I was like, it was a friend of mine, my friend Jerome. He was, he makes music, and he's actually just become widely successful, producing beats for Kanye West and whatnot. But he asked me if I would do a music video for him when I first moved to LA. And he had been doing this stuff where he was like re-editing old like 80s and 90s bad CG.
Right.
And all of his music videos were just like re-edited references of those things.
Okay.
And I was watching these videos, and I just told him, I was like, I could probably just make that. And he got really excited about that. So we actually worked together on what was my first proper animation I ever did. And I made it over a very heavily mistake-filled month. Basically the month I moved to LA.
Mm-hmm.
And then after I did that one, I was just like, this is amazing. And the last 4 years, I just worked really, really hard on it, picked up a lot of tricks. I really think you learn from doing stuff. At least I do.
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
And the usual process for animation is so antithetical to actually doing animation. And I never took that route. So I would rather, I don't do storyboards for anything, because I could use that time to actually animate stuff,
right,
know? And so I tend to just dive into things, and as a result, I've just made just a ton of minutes of animation over the last 4 years, and that's how I think. You just pick up a little, every time you make something, you pick up a couple little new tricks, So it was far from me just sitting down one day and being like, oh, I got this,
Right.
It's still I'm still learning all these new things every day.
Well, I also think it's interesting that you had this experience of cramming for teaching, but also that it didn't really become artful to you until you left teaching. I can't tell you the number of people that I talk to that basically say that, if they're teaching the thing that is their art, it becomes very hard to, at the end of the day, do art. It's just, you're exhausted by then, right?
Yep.
And so it actually is better if you teach something that just isn't connected at all with what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Or just don't teach at all, which has been my recent strategy, which has worked out great.
Has it?
Yeah.
Because I'm about to take that approach. I've been teaching part-time at a art school here locally. We just decided that as a family, we're going to pick up and we're going to move across the country. And as part of that, I am going to stop teaching for a while and go back to the woodshed and try and do some art again.
Yeah.
I don't know how that'll go.
The thing that happened to me, I think there were two things that made it really hard. Thing number one was you had to when you're teaching, there's different ways of teaching, but especially when you're teaching in a technical subject, I teach my students the right way to do things,
Mm-hmm.
and the theory behind things. And we're showing examples that are the highest end version of the work that they're trying to do.
Right.
And then you get home to work on your own stuff, and all of that is still there. When, as if you're actually a working artist, you don't do anything the right way. You don't have to anymore because you,
right.
you know, you learned how to do it the right way, and then you're like, okay, now I can do it my way.
Right.
Informed by the right way. But I was always maybe a little too preoccupied with like what my students would think of it, or like, am I breaking my own rules that I'm giving to them, or am I, you know, that burden for me was really tough.
Oh, sure.
And then, I mean, the other thing for me was just I started teaching when I was really young, and I would see all my students graduate college and go on and like do cool things, and I was just like, man, I should have done cool things. Like, what am I doing here? I'm just like, they're all flying off, and I'm just like here, you know, still here. But it was like I literally had to move across country to stop though, because
sure.
at the same time, teaching's a great job. But both in terms of just like it's a nice employment environment, but also it's so inspiring to see all these, you know, young people, and you get this like high from teaching that I think any good teacher gets.
Right.
You know, at the end of a good class, you're just like there's like a euphoric feeling. I'm really excited to do it again, like when I'm 50s, 60s, you know, like I feel like that'll be the time when I'm like, all right, I'll just chill.
Sure.
And, yeah.
So now you said that originally you went to art school so that you could play music, and boy, talk about a storied history of that being kind of an approach, right?
Yeah.
What kind of music were you into? What were you doing? And do you still do music?
I do still do music. It's been more or less the one constant in my life. I started playing music when I was about five or 6 years old, and I always have. And just like in other things, I've always been restless about it. So I never got good at any one instrument, but I can fake my way through almost all of them.
Uh-huh.
When I was about 14, I stumbled upon an analog synthesizer, and that was the thing that like kind of changed and defined my musical life. I got just obsessed with it. I've been obsessed with synths now for 22 years.
Nice.
But I still would like play drums and play guitar and things, and I played in punk bands, and I played in like Britpop cover bands, and I played in like electronic synth pop bands, and I made dance music, and I made hip hop music, and I've done the whole deal. But the one thing that's interesting is it's always kind of like ebbed and flowed. Like there's been times in my life where I'm playing music more and making music more, and then there's times in my life where it kind of fades into the background, and I, you know, sell all my gear and I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore, and then it always creeps back in. And I think the times in my life when I've been the happiest have been when I'm making the most music.
Right.
And now I'm, you know, I have like zero aspirations to ever be successful at playing music. And I think I kind of always have. Like, I've always just enjoyed the act of doing it.
Right.
Now I'm more self-aware that like the important thing about making music for me is just that it makes my life better.
Sure.
And it makes me happy. And as a useful side effect, I can use them as sound effects or soundtracks for films.
Right.
But I think it's just like this like beautiful human thing to do.
Yeah.
I think it's odd that we don't have a culture of just playing music being just a thing that everybody does, you know? You don't have to be good at it. You don't have to like even perform out for people. It's just a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, it's interesting too, because some of how you frame like your relationship with playing and with, you know, the accumulation of instruments or whatever, that really resonates with me. I kind of get this thing where it's like I want to get one more thing. I want to get one thing. And then I look and I'm like, I got too much shit. It's all got to go. And because on one hand, it seems like the equipment, really enables you to have that enjoyment and stuff like that. But at some point, then all of a sudden you look at it and you're like, how did it get to be about the gear? It's got to be about something deeper than that. And then there ends up being like this welling up of frustration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing I eventually realized for me was that this desire for new equipment really just stemmed from you see a new piece of equipment and you imagine these new sounds or these new possibilities. I can have those. And so you research the piece of equipment and you do all this stuff, and then it comes and you get really excited and you sit down and make a whole bunch of music for 3 or 4 days, and then you're kind of bored of it.
Right.
Or then you move on to the next thing. Now, whenever I see something new that I think looks really exciting, I go into my studio and I try to just replicate what that thing can do with what I already have.
Uh-huh.
And it has the same end effect.
Sure.
I get really into the studio. I think it's just in any art, whether it's music or visual art or filmmaking or writing. I had a teacher in college who told me the best thing that I've tried to live my life by, which is whatever gets you into the studio and gets you working is the thing you should be doing.
Uh-huh.
And I think that the desire for new gear, when the new gear comes, it's something that gets you into the studio.
Sure.
And that feels good to you.
Right.
So my whole life I've been trying to come up with better, more healthy, more long-term sustainable solutions to get me into doing the things that I want to be doing. And also I have a new rule as of the last 3 years, is I have one desk, and I'm only allowed to have enough stuff that can fit on that one desk.
That's an interesting approach. Yeah.
Yeah. If I run out of space,
go. Yeah, well, that's similar to my rule about so I'm a modular synth guy, and my rule is that I have this tip-top case that holds, it's called a Station 252 because it holds 252 HP of modules. And I have decided that that's all the more space I'm going to dedicate to modules in my life.
Yep,
so
for sure.
If there's something I really gotta have, something else has to go. And what that's meant is that I have winnowed this thing into being a very, very personal and idiosyncratic, but very expressive for me system. It doesn't have sort of one-shot wonders or things that are bright, shiny objects. It's the stuff that I can consistently do interesting work with.
Mm-hmm.
And so what kind of instruments have you hung on to or do you now currently use?
Well, so now I am trying to. I mean, I used to be a big Eurorack fan. At one point, actually, right when I left Brooklyn, I had a wall of it, and it was very cool. But this was maybe 5 years ago when you could probably you could fill a dinner table with all the people who were making modules at that time, and now there's just
there's so many.
I don't even know how many.
It's
Every time I glance back at the Eurorack forum, I'm like, what are all these modules? Who are these people making these things? It's crazy. Right. But at the same time, working with modular is so great. And when I was in college, we had a Moog modular, and we had a Buchla, and we had a Serge, and I always loved playing with that stuff. And I actually, in 1999, I think, I actually bought a Doepfer modular.
Okay.
Which is way ahead of the Euro. It was when Doepfer first came out. I was so excited that there's just something portable and economically feasible to own.
Right.
But it became that thing again. I realized, with Eurorack, there was so much time you could spend just researching it and looking into things and listening to demos and thinking about, do I need that or do I need that, or going on the modular grid and rearranging your case 500 times. And I was like, this sucks. This is really overwhelming. So now I have a modest size Serge system. That's my main instrument.
Okay.
And my rule for the Serge, I jump started it by buying a couple of panels, but my rule is I have to build all of it.
Okay.
Anything I'm going to get, I have to build.
So like the CGS stuff?
Yeah. Yeah,
CGS,
and there's also a German company called Random Source that's making things now.
Oh, okay.
Based on CGS and based on Serge designs still,
right. Oh, okay.
They use SMT parts, and I think they're a little less authentic, but a little more sophisticated.
Sure.
But that's been really nice to just limit it down to that being sort of the one instrument. I have a couple other little things, like I have like a micro brute that I mostly use as a controller, and a chord Volca keys in case I need to play a chord for some reason.
Right.
But it's actually been really, really cool. And since I've gotten the Serge, it's I've been a lot more productive, because like you hear this time and time again, but as soon as you limit the tools that you can use, your productivity goes way up. You just spend less time fiddling with the tools and more time chasing the thing that you're meant to be chasing.
Yeah, it's interesting that you settle on Serge. My first serious modular was a Serge. I had a 7-panel Serge system. It was pretty huge. I think that in a way, a lot of what I'm seeing myself do with Eurorack is kind of going back to the simplicity but flexibility that I experienced with the Serge. You know, I'm finding ways to get that kind of similar functionality in this smaller format thing, because I found myself being very productive and being very musical with the Serge system. Again, I think you identified the limitations. It provides limitations, but it sort of like says, I'm going to close off one avenue of options and instead present this maybe less obvious, but kind of artistically interesting avenue. And so if you want to explore, you're going to have to go that way instead. Right.
Right. Yeah. And I think for me, the cool thing about Serge is that like everything you need is in there.
Right.
It's just not like, I have a lot of friends who use Eurorack, and I'll see they get some like fancy new module and showing it off to me, and I'll be like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. And then in my brain, I'm just reconstructing how I can do that on the Serge, and you can, you know,
right.
There's like it'll take, you don't just push a button, you have to, you know, patch some stuff up. But that to me, like the Serge feels like a fundamental set of building blocks.
Right.
And that was the thing that always sparked my imagination about modular synths, was that you can build this thing up from very small pieces.
Yeah.
And I think as Eurorack became about denser modules and more like complete function blocks, I lost interest. Yeah,
well, one of the things that I dance with, and then I realize how unsatisfying it is modules that do too much. Modules that literally kind of predefine how they're going to work. That's the thing that initially, you know, like you said, you jump in a studio and your first shot at it is like, oh, it sounds awesome. This is amazing. It's wonderful. But 3 days later, you're like, well, it's still doing that same thing, and I would really like it to do a different thing now.
Yeah, I got a new pedal recently, and I was really excited, and I played with it, and I was like, yes, this is great. And then I just ran like an arpeggiated sequence on the micro brute through it, and like was sweeping the filter up, and I was like, oh my God, there's this record, and I won't name the artist, but this artist's entire one album of this entire artist
is that
the whole album is just running arpeggiated synths through this one setting on this one pedal. And I was just sitting there like recreating his whole album for a night, just like loving it, and being like, he never even turns this knob, like it's this. There's something great about that, but at the same time it made me like kind of hate that title now because
Oh,
I feel like
sure,
I can't
right.
use it because
Yeah.
it's
It's
all over
already
this other
been.
album. But I'll find a new way to use it.
Yeah, somebody else put the Queen's flag on it already, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about Undervolt because this is the thing, this is where your name first came up in my discussions with Andrew. And I actually went and did some diving around, and it's a fascinating undertaking. So what you're doing is basically taking a lot of the concepts of like a record label, but applying them to video art, which is pretty interesting, and it's a pretty interesting approach. Now, my first question is, what did you find that made the similarity work, and where did you find places where they didn't really correlate? I mean, where was the record company concept viable, and where did it not really work?
It's an interesting question because I think actually the correlation's been pretty dead on.
Really?
In terms of like the things that we've been successful at are the things that I think current record labels are successful at, and the things that we've failed at, or not failed, or the things that we've struggled with have been things that current record labels are struggling with.
Sure.
So in concrete terms, album sales are not making this thing. The album sales aren't great,
Mm-hmm.
and we were expecting that going in.
Right.
And I think every record label would tell you the same thing right now. That's not where they're giving value to their artists. But what has been really successful for us is doing events, doing performances, and also just like bundling this great group of people together into one bigger force,
Right.
which gives us a lot of opportunities that those artists wouldn't necessarily have on their own. It also lets us kind of, we have a mix of like fairly well-established people in this field and newcomers or people whose work has just been undervalued or under-recognized up till now.
Right.
And it's nice that we can kind of buoy up these people who are doing great work who might not have had those kinds of opportunities on their own.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been interesting to see how closely it does mirror what's going on in the music industry.
Right. Yeah. It does seem like at this point, in the music world, the concept of the record label as being sort of an accumulator of talent that works well together is kind of the strongest position that it has. And so I think you're right. And also the concept that album sales aren't what's really the exciting side of labels at this point is also pretty interesting. Mm-hmm. So what the question I then have though is there is an extent to which the output of record labels can sort of live on its own, just in that you release records and, DJs can play them or people can enjoy them in their home or whatever. It seems like video art tends to be a little bit more location oriented, like, either having a gallery space that knows how to deal with video art or putting together something that has kind of a specific locale. Am I missing the point, or is that?
No, that's actually a very good point, because we started as an alternative to the current options that were there for video artists, and the label was started by Yoshi Sodioka, who has had an incredible career, and then I jumped on board, and a number of other artists. So it was built by artists, and it was built by a group of artists who were very frustrated by this thing that didn't exist, and we were trying to make the thing that didn't exist, and that is that if you are not a proper gallery artist and you're working in video art, there's nowhere for your work to go that it makes sense.
Right.
Like, obviously, TV and film doesn't want it. galleries have a hard time selling it, so they don't want it. Academia is just weird, and not necessarily welcoming to the kind of work that our artists do. And this is like an age-old problem. I mean, this goes back to like people working in this way since the 30s. There's always been, like, you look at people like Stan Brakhage. Stan Brakhage never had an actual career. I mean, you look back and he made this incredible body of work, and everybody knows of his legacy and all of this stuff, but he died pretty much broke. You know, he's got some accolades and some things, but the gallery world didn't want him. The TV and film world didn't want him. Nobody wanted him. So part of the main impetus for creating this thing was to say, like, here's a place where this kind of work makes sense.
Sure.
Now, where I think we've struggled is exactly what you're talking about, in that we have not yet been able to crack, and this is like a technology problem. Like we're just very small artist run, but I think the key to making this something that would be essential to people's lives is figuring out the technology part of how you deliver it to them in a way that fits in their lives.
Right.
I was really obsessed for a while with the idea of a live streaming option or a Roku channel, or, you know, something along those lines, because I thought that could start to open it up. But it was just me trying to code this thing. I had no idea how to actually code, so it didn't work so good. But I think there really is a space there. And actually yesterday or 2 days ago, I was doing a similar phone interview with a really excitable young man who I hope succeeds, but what he's trying to do is build such a platform, like something that's creator-friendly for artists who are making more avant-garde, more weird, more out there stuff, but find a way to deliver it to people who want to watch it in a way where it monetizes it for artists and also makes it, you know, an enjoyable and digestible experience for people who want to see it.
Right.
And it's a tough problem. It's an inherently niche market, but you know, we have these funny ideas of scale these days. You know, if there's 100,000 people in the United States who would be very interested in something, nobody cares.
Yeah, you know, I know.
When you're talking about, you know, and I work at BuzzFeed, I see this every day. When you're talking about something that's not in the scales of millions, nobody cares.
Right.
And I don't think that's a new problem in the mainstream, but I feel like it is a new problem in more underground scenes and more avant-garde scenes. And I feel like in the 90s and whatnot, there was this really strong culture of DIY releasing and DIY distribution. And I just think before the internet, there was an inherent financial part of it. You wouldn't ship something to somebody for free. Right. Somebody wanted to hear a cool record, they had to pay for it. You know, they just had to. Right. And now that burden's been gone, I feel like the people who are really feeling it the most are these people with, like, maybe just 100,000 fans, but that's still a lot of people. You know, you should be able to do something like that. But the way that we've kind of built the infrastructure for the internet, that's not seen as significant. You know, YouTube won't make you a partner if you're regularly getting 100,000 views, but it's like, I'm getting 100,000 views. That's more than a lot of cable shows. It's super interesting for me now to see the big version of that. Because when if we do something at BuzzFeed and it gets 500,000 views, it's like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. Like that's considered a failure.
Well, you mentioned that it was fascinating being part of BuzzFeed, and I would imagine you are sort of like, you know, getting to watch the fire hose. You know, it's got to be crazy. It's
also it's wild to see. I mean, you know, we're doing fine as a company, but like, shouldn't we be making a lot more money? You know, like when you're looking at a scale of where 500,000 viewers is a failure
right.
on a daily basis, and you're getting billions and billions of content views, that's unprecedented. Like the
Right.
size of viewership that we have
Yeah.
is unprecedented in human history for a media company.
Yeah.
And by any logic, we should be the most valuable media company in the world.
Right.
We're not, but why not? I mean, it just feels like something about, and there's a really good book about this that I cite a lot called Who Owns the Future? And it's by Jaron Lanier,
Yeah.
who was, he was the guy who coined the term cyberspace. But
he's sort of a skeptic of the whole thing, though.
He is, and now he is extremely skeptical,
Right.
because he identifies this problem where the internet just kind of sucked all of the money out of what would have been previously known as the middle class.
Mm-hmm.
All of these middle class jobs are replaced. These huge, what used to be huge companies can now have 30 employees,
Right.
and operate in the same space.
Yeah.
They don't need 3,000 employees anymore. They can do it. And the internet started with this very utopian ideal of like, oh, everything's free and everything's shared and and it's like, that's great, but it would be great if nobody was making money anymore.
Right.
But all it's really done is it's made it very easy to consolidate where that wealth goes,
Right.
where all the money that's going into the internet, it's so easy to funnel it into tiny little things. And I feel like who's really getting squeezed are people who are trying to do more niche endeavors. You don't get the same. If you're getting 100,000 viewers, you should be getting 10% of what somebody who gets 1 million viewers is getting.
Right.
But that's not how the internet has been structured to
That's
work.
not how it goes. Right.
Right. So it's kind of like you're big or you're nothing.
Right.
And he puts out his theory or his solution to this, which I'm obsessed with. Nobody's done it right yet. Maybe it's too late, but his whole idea is a system of micropayment for content views. So, like every time you watch a video on YouTube, you pay like 0.1 cents.
Right.
For the average people watching YouTube, if you watch like 10 hours of YouTube a day for a month, that equals up to like $16 or $17 a month, which I think people would happily pay.
Right.
And you would lose you wouldn't need the entire advertising system. You would just get rid of all of that. And you could pay content creators flatly across the board just per views. And it would equal out to the same that the big companies are making from ad revenues, but it would create more possibility for people who are doing much smaller operations.
Well, I think I think one of the things too that has to happen is there has to be some mechanism by which you can be viable in the content production world without having to somehow be attached to the Kardashian family, right? Or something.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
There has to be a way
Absolutely.
to basically say, there can be the production of valuable content that doesn't have to be glitz and glamour, that doesn't have to be celebrity driven, but can be quality driven. And I think that's the one thing where the internet has kind of let us down. It has foregrounded the People magazine culture and the Wired magazine culture, but nobody has stepped up and had a play for like the zine culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of goes back to your ideas of like some of the earlier DIY. I mean, I think back, I was like really involved in sort of like, the punk culture where, somebody would have this magazine that they would make 50 of, and they'd go to Kinko's and run them off on a Xerox machine. And, you'd pay your $12 a year just because you could keep in touch with the Oregon punk scene or whatever, right? It's fabulous. But now you're right. That would be, the assumption is that's free. Why would I ever have to pay for such a thing? And there are people that are making money off of the fact that this stuff exists on the internet. It's just not any of the people that are driving that part of the culture.
Yeah. And it's this great trick that was played, and I don't think it was maliciously played. Like, I don't think this was anybody's big plan. It's just kind of the way it evolved. And you don't realize that, you know, every time you upload something to Instagram, you're making Instagram as a company more valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And what are they giving you? They're giving you an app that, you know, really it's not adding that much value to your life, you know, not enough that you're, you know, it's just weird. We all feed this huge machine. And there is actual revenue being generated from it, but it's going to kind of all the wrong places.
It seems like it, yeah.
And it also feels almost like it's too late to correct, like it grew into what it was. And now you just gotta hope somebody takes it down, you know?
Right. Yeah, and I don't even know what that could look like at this point. It's hard to imagine.
Well, it's interesting to see the kind of Band-Aids that have grown over it. And for me right now, like, the Band-Aids are Kickstarter and GoFundMe and things like that, where you've pretty much reduced creative people to begging for money on the internet. Which is not I don't know if you've ever talked to Andrew about Kickstarter or
I haven't,
GoFundMe, but he's very against those as well. And a lot of artists I know are very against it because they are just like, you know, I just don't want to go out and publicly beg for money to make this thing that I want to make. That's a weird and uncomfortable position to be in. But that's kind of the Band-Aid that's grown up around this system. Sure. And
well, there's also a primary flaw to me with that system, which is that the people that from whom you're asking the money, they are basically put in a position to judge your work before it's done, which is sort of like the antithesis of what making art is about. You make the art and then you put it out there. You put it out there, you know, you take the big gulp of air, you throw the artwork out there and see what the reaction is. And hopefully it's positive, but even if it's negative, something valuable comes out of the process. When the whole thing is foregrounded by funding, the negative half of that just means, well, I'm just not going to do that work then. And the positive end of it did end up looking like, well, okay, I got to pay off for my begging. It somehow doesn't seem artistic at all.
Yeah. And it's just, you know, the thing that drives me nuts is that people are consuming more media than ever. Yeah. And they love it, you know, and there's more obsession about so many different kinds of media than there ever has been before. And you'd think that would make it more valuable, but it's had the opposite effect of kind of just devaluing it across the board. And, you know, I know a lot of people have been very successful as artists and as creators, but I know many more who were great and were doing really interesting things and had strong followings who would eventually just stop because you have to cross a certain threshold before you will be able to make a living in any significant way.
Yeah, and so it feels like even though you have a lot of supporters, it feels like it's withering because it doesn't match the numbers that we've now come to expect.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I really hope that we wouldn't, because one of the things I noticed with other interviews that you've done is a lot of people are like, Undervolt, how do you make money on there? Right? Yeah. But it's interesting. I mean, we kind of went a different tangent. I mean, we're almost like, I think between you and I, we're about ready to start like Occupy Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Because it is frustrating. It's a frustrating thing to see, and it actually is kind of an important thing to talk about in the art world too. So I appreciate you being willing to talk about it, even though I was going to try not to make you go down that path.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you had mentioned that, I mean, the whenever I talk to people, the idea of making money never comes up pretty much until we start talking about Undervolt, and then it's just such an inherent part of the conversation because we are, it is a business.
Yeah, well, and you identify as a label, and so there is a commercial aspect to saying that, right?
Yeah, and I also think it's I think one of the interesting things about doing Undervolt, and it is an interesting opportunity to talk about the way the economy of the internet works.
Right.
And it's something that people just don't talk about in any substantive way. And I kind of feel like any chance I get to approach that conversation, I lean into it. So it's definitely my fault. But I think it's important, and I think we're going to lose. You made a really good point. We're going to just, like, Kardashian culture is what happens when you don't find a way to economically support the, like, middle layer of people doing interesting things that will never have a mass appeal.
Right.
And we've kind of lost, as a culture, we've lost our mechanisms to support those people.
It seems like it. You're right. Well, on that not altogether uplifting note, our time is pretty much up. But one thing I'd like to do is for you to just give a shout out about where to find the Undervolt work and where to find your work, so that people who are listening to podcasts can jump out there and check the things that you've been doing.
Cool. Well, my personal website is just johnnywoods.com. I still sell DVDs because I'm old school. And actually, I don't put a lot of my work on my website. So you have to get the DVDs. Right. And then Undervolt is at undervolt.co. That's the website.
All right, cool. I want to thank you so much for the time that you've dedicated to this, and for being willing to kind of just like shoot all over the place and talk about crazy stuff. It was great.
Yeah, thank you so much, Darwin. It's great.
All right. And next time I'm in LA, we're going to have to go out and catch some beers and tacos or something, because I want to carry on this conversation, but I want to do it face to face too. So
cool. Sounds good.
All right, man. Thanks a lot. We'll catch you soon.
Bye. Okay. Bye.
Many thanks to Johnny Woods again for spending the time with us and kind of taking this wide-ranging discussion through all the different things he's interested in and all the things he's concerned about. I want to thank you for listening, for continuing to listen as we are getting into a huge stack of podcasts. If you haven't done so in a while, you might want to take a look at our back catalog. We've got a lot of interesting people you can listen to. And if you have any suggestions, please drop me a line at ddg@cycling74.com, and we'll see what we can do about it. Thanks a lot. I'll catch you soon. Bye.